Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our second presentation on the apocalypse, the end times. The first presentation is when we looked at how Israel and Europe will impact the world as the end times emerge. And today we are going to look at another area of the world, and that is Russia and Babylon, and how these nations will affect the world as the end times approach. Is that better? Good. Okay. I'd like to welcome you to the second presentation on the apocalypse, the end times. In the first presentation, we looked at how Israel and Europe will impact the world as the end times emerge. And today we're going to look at another area of the world, and that's going to be Russia and Babylon, and how these nations will affect the world as the end times approach. So today's second lesson is titled Signs of the Apocalypse, Russia and Babylon. So, who here can tell me what is the apocalypse? When you think of the apocalypse, and you were to describe it, tell me what do you understand?
The ending of the day of grace and the beginning of the trials and tribulations of the world to come.
Well, that's actually a very, very good description of it. It's not the end of the world as end of the world, period, because as we know, the world will never end. But at the same time, too, it's going to talk about what Roland says is the day of grace, and what there's going to be the coming of this emerging of the trials and tribulations, and how things are going to affect us. And where in the Bible is the apocalypse mentioned?
Daniel and Revelation.
And there's one other one.
Hosea.
Nope. You're close, though.
One of
the prophets, but what to the prophet?
Jeremiah.
Ezekiel.
Ezekiel, yeah.
Okay, so we've got the prophets Ezekiel and Daniel, but also in the prophets, or in the book of Revelation. Next slide. Now, when you hear something regarding the country of Russia, what is your immediate reaction? When you hear Russia in the news and things like that, and you hear about things that are happening associated with Russia, what is your immediate reaction when you hear that? Is it usually positive, or is it negative?
Negative.
Negative? Why?
It's too much of bullies.
Very good description. And I'll talk to you when I was a little kid. Personally, as a kid growing up, during the Cold War, I often thought of the worst could possibly happen. But not only could happen, but it probably was going to happen. That two superpowers, the USSR and Russia, the USSR and the US, are engaging in a nuclear war. And this made me very nervous, as I think most of the people it does. But as time went on, with the collapse of the USSR in 1991 into a weaker Russia, I was more confident that this would less likely occur. But then there was Russia's invasion of Crimea in 2013. And now neighboring Ukraine in February 2022. Russia went on to be seen as the superpower once again, and then they have the belief that, as you said, they were bullies, that might is right, that they still wanted, first they wanted back the land that went free from them in 1991, but also too, it seems like they want more. Now, present day Russia makes me and most people very nervous. It should make us nervous because how they're acting. Yet at the same time, it should not. Why not? Why shouldn't it make us nervous about Russia?
Because God's in control.
Exactly. So pretty much what I just said here. Next slide, please. Well, first, if we see with the eyes of faith, we see that God's hand is in all of this. And if we keep our eyes on Him, the things He shows us signs and gives us revelations of things that are going to happen, but not to be overwhelmed by them, but at the same time, to look for the signs of the time. And then, if we see with the eyes of faith, and we keep our eyes on Him, the prophet Ezekiel predicted this centuries ago. Ezekiel is asking us to watch for the signs of the time and to prepare ourselves for them. Next slide. So Russia has an aggression and alliance. There's going to be an aggression by them, but there's also going to be an alliance of 10 countries. And Ezekiel talked about this 2,500 years ago. And he talked of Russia's return to power in the latter days, in what we call the end times. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 talks of how Israel will be invaded by 10 countries, including Russia, in a coalition of mostly Islamic nations. Ezekiel 38, verses 2 to 6 reads, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against them, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put your foots into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company of bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them, with a shield and helmet. Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops, many people are with you. End quote. So in ancient times, we're looking at these names. There was Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal talked about. And these today are understood to be Russia, Moscow, and Tobolsk. Now, Russia will lead this coalition it talks about, and is believed to be Russia. Rosh is expected to be Russia for two reasons. First, its phonetic similarity. It sounds very similar. Rosh, Russia. But also, too, it's spelled very close as well. So for those two reasons, it's believed. And secondly, we look at the map. What is it that you notice about the map of Israel on the left as a country? Now look at that map. What is it that you notice about its location? Where is it?
On the Mediterranean Sea,
Mediterranean Sea, but something else.
directly south of Moscow.
Okay, that too.
Central location.
Okay, who said that? Good. Right, its location is in the middle of the earth. And so when we go through that, we see that the prophet Daniel said, and Ezekiel talk of how Russia will be invaded in the latter days. Daniel 11 talks about the attack from the king of the north. And Ezekiel prophesied in Ezekiel 38 that these invading armies will invade from the far north. Only one country occupies geographical position in the far north in relation to Israel, and that is Russia. Notice how Russia's landmass extends all the way from the Baltic to the Bering Seas, all the way from all of Europe, all the way from one side of Russia to all the way to the other side. So it's pretty much almost around 2/3 really of the world. So its mass is really big. But not Russia will not act alone in its invasion of Israel. Next slide. Who will be in this alliance? See how many we can guess. I mentioned some of them earlier, and I'll help you with them. Of course, we know one is Russia. Secondly, it says Gog, the land of Magog, and this which means high or supreme. Who are these countries?
China, India, North Korea.
Nope, further west. Countries that used to be part of Russia, but then broke off. What I call the Stan countries. These are Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and perhaps Afghanistan. So this what I call the Stan countries, and they're all close together. And also, what do you notice about these countries? First, I mentioned earlier, they're from where? The former Russia bloc. And they broke off in 91. So Russia and them will come back again. Russia will want to bring them together as well. And also, there's another thing that you should notice about them. What about their faith? What is it that you notice? Mostly what? Countries. What faith background do they have? Not Christian, they're Islamic countries. So here Russia will combine a Christian country with almost 9 other countries. Also there's Meshach and Tubal, that's what we talked about, Moscow. Tubal is also what country? Starts with the T as well.
Turkey?
Yep, Turkey. I think you wrote this. Yes, and also then there's Persia. Persia, in Ezekiel 38, talks that Persia will participate in Russia's invasion of Israel. And what name did Persia change its name to in 1935?
Iran.
Iran. And what about in 1975? It changed it to the Islamic Republic of Iran. So Russia and Iran will be leading forces to wipe Israel off the map. 5th is Ethiopia. This is a modern day which country in Africa? Sudan. And this is one of Israel's fiercest enemies. 6th is Libya, and that's land just west of Ethiopia. And this is another one of Russia's friends that is Islamic and has working ties with Russia in buying military armaments from them. Then there's also Gomer, and this is believed to be which country? Look at the first letter. What country in Europe starts with G?
Germany?
Germany. And it's Islamic overtones will be involved with this. There's also Togarmah, sorry for my pronunciation. Ezekiel saw this country from the far north and with all its troops, and some also believe this country also to be Turkey. So how many did we get? We got Russia, many of the Stan nations, Turkey, Iran, Sudan, Libya, and Germany. Next slide. And the next slide as well, please. So the reasons why Russia and its alliance will attack. God gives us 4 reasons why God will attack, why God will be attacked in Ezekiel 38. First, Russia and its alliance wants to first seize Israel's land. In Ezekiel 38, verses 11 and 12, it reads, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are inhabited. So first it wants to seize Israel's land. Secondly, it wants to seize Israel's wealth. Verses 12 and 13 read, to take plunder and booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take plunder. End quote. Thirdly, they want to invade, slaughter Israel's people, which reads in verse 16, you come up against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land. End quote. So we saw in our last presentation on how various countries throughout history, including Babylon, have a hatred, a disdain for the Jews. And the only way to bring about satisfaction to these countries is to bring about their annihilation, the destruction of the Jewish people as a nation and as a people. Now, and then the fourth reason why Russia and its alliance wants to attack Israel is answered in the last chapter. And this is from the heart of God. That kind of sounds funny, doesn't it? When you say it's from the heart of God. But God will allow this to happen for one reason. To bring about the destruction of Russia and Babylon and its alliances, and for their allies for the wicked ways and beliefs. Next slide. So when will this invasion occur? 3 signs must be present in the end times. First, Israel must be present in its own land. And this happened in what year?
1948.
1948, correct. Now, Israel will accompany, but not only just its land, but also there was it talks about in the Bible, in Ezekiel 38, about mountains. And this has been completed. And this was before the 6-Day War of 1967. The mountains belonged to the Jordanian Arabs. But after the war, the mountains are back in Israel's hands. I don't remember that because I was way too young. But there was that war, and I guess it was quite horrendous. A lot of bombings and things like that. And so it was a 7-day war, or 6-day war, sorry. And that they did that, and it came back into the hands of that. So that was fulfilled. The second one is the second sign that must be present before the coming of the end times. Israel must be prosperous. Well, I think this goes without saying. Israel has the most billionaires and millionaires, with the exception of 2 countries. Which countries?
U.S.
U.S. is one, and what's the other one? Very prosperous country right now. China. Right. Those are the 2 countries. So it has the most billionaires and millionaires, with the exception of those 2 other countries. It's not a very big country, but look at the wealth associated with it. So that has been fulfilled. But the third sign is yet to be fulfilled. And Israel, and that's the one that Israel must be at peace in her land. And this is yet to happen. But it will happen with full force and bring about spiritual Israel's spiritual revival. And it will be at a time when Israel is at peace in her land. Prophet Daniel told us how this will come about. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 reads, "And he," meaning the Antichrist, "shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week," which actually means 7 years. "And in that midst of week, he shall," and he, the Antichrist, "and in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate." So, the Antichrist, many who believe is Germany, will convince Israel there's no need for weapons. And this has yet to happen. Of course, Israel has a big stockpile of weapons to protect itself. But Germany will try to convince Israel that the European coalition to settle the Arab-Israeli war or dispute. And Germany will promise to create a lasting peace, a covenant with the Jews to secure their protection. Now, Israel will trust God, and Israel will let down its guard and its protection. And for the first time in its existence, she will be open to the right attack of Russia. And there will be an implementation of this 7-year peace treaty with the Antichrist, which many who believe to be Germany. But because their protection will be down, Russia will step out of this and break the treaty. And Israel will no longer have its self-protection. Next slide. And being that there's no protection, it looks like Israel has no chance. And so, but there's going to be four calamities that take place that will take place, and in that will help to secure and protect Israel. First, this 4 calamities will descend upon the invading armies when God intervenes to protect his people. First, there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, but felt everywhere on earth. Ezekiel 38, verses 19 to 20 reads, "For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I have spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, so that the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. The mountains shall be thrown down, the steeps shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground." End quote. Next slide. The second calamity, well, there will be military confusion. And this is what will save Israel. Ezekiel in verse 38 reads, "I will call for a sword against Gog throughout all my mountains, says the Lord God. Every man's sword will be against his brother." In other words, they'll be fighting. There'll be a dust, and in that dust there'll be a fight of those that are of the coalition against each other. And in the midst of the war, the invading armies will turn on each other, causing confusion. Next slide. Third, there will be a major disease. Unburied bodies will lie everywhere. And because of this, there's massive amounts of deaths and disease will spread. Ezekiel in verse 32 reads, "And I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples who are with him, flooding rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone." Next slide. There will be also storms and fires. will be the fourth calamity. There'll be torrential rains, hailstone, fire and brimstone, and subsequently destroying Gog and Magog, Russia, and its allies. Next slide. So Israel's so grossly outmatched Russia and its coalition, they could annihilate her from the face of the earth if she does not surrender. But just as Israel seems to be at its end, God will intervene. In Ezekiel 38, in verses 15 and 16, it reads, "Then you will come from your place out of the far north, you and your many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great company and a mighty army. You will come against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land. It will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me, when I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before their eyes." End quote. So there are these four calamities that are going to take place. There's going to be a great earthquake. There's going to be a military confusion. Thirdly, there's going to be major infection. And fourthly, there's going to be multiple calamities. And it will fall on Russia and its allies, like it did on Sodom and Gomorrah. And they will not escape punishment. Next slide. And Ezekiel 39 talks about the disposal of these bodies and equipment. First, there's going to be birds and the beast. They will be called upon by God to dispose of the rotting corpses. Secondly, there's going to be burnings of equipment. Tons of it will have to be disposed of, taking 7 years to get rid of. And thirdly, there's going to be burials, taking 7 months to bury all the dead. A greater calamity then will be called upon Russia and its allies. Next slide. And two things will come because of this. First, Russia and its coalition will receive the aftermath of its ways. She is antagonistic towards God and disruptive to the world. So not only is it against Israel, but it's also to that of the world that it is trying to control. And the second thing that will become because of it will be the world will marvel at God and how he can bring down such a powerful country or enemy coalition, 10 countries, and preserve his people Israel. And that in this, people will see that God is faithful to his promise. And inevitably, we realize that God is in control. The sins of the world uses in order to accomplish his wishes. So God has a purpose for us to be here, and in that he's going to fulfill that with first his people Israel, but then all the people of the world, to all Christians. And that because of that, he's going to bring the downfall of those who are trying to bring the downfall to Israel. Next slide. Now let's have a look at Babylon. First we talked about Russia, now we're going to talk about Babylon. Now Babylon as a country was mentioned frequently in the Bible, and I did not know this, but it was the second most country mentioned in the Bible behind that of Israel. Mainly when it was talked about that, it was talked about in many negative ways. When Babylon was talked about, it was negative. And it is never positive because Babylon was paganistic. Secondly, it was humanistic. And thirdly, it was rebellious against God. And we see in Genesis 11, we see the Tower of Babel. Next slide, please. So when Babylon is mentioned in the Bible, it's never positive because she was paganistic, humanistic, and rebellious against God. And in Genesis 11, we see the Tower of Babel. And this was man's first attempt to establish a world order. And because of this, God destroys the tower. Next slide. Now Babylon will try and become a dominant country, and there are 3 reasons why she wants to become a dominant that, and she wants to Israel and its land. First, Babylon is near the center of the earth, and it is in a beautiful and fertile Tigris and Euphrates plain. Secondly, she has the most oil reserves on the earth. In other words, she's what? Financially wealthy. She has lots of money. Thirdly, in the end times, Babylon will have some of the most needed commodities on earth. And this I did not know. Next slide, please. We read in Revelation 18, verses 12 and 13, tells us of what Babylon will possess. And here it reads, merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. So, what do you notice in the first items that of gold, silver? What are they? They're precious, aren't they? Precious stones and precious gold and silver. And then the other ones, they're valuable commodities. All those things mentioned there are valuable. They're worth something. Now, what do you notice is missing? There's no what there.
Water.
No, not that. There's no what?
Money.
Money. There's no currencies. So many believe this is perhaps could mean the collapse of currencies, and there's a movement towards, like before currencies were around, commodities, right? So these are commodities. So there's a belief that there's going to be a destruction of the banks, that there's going to be the commodities are going to take over once again, and that there's going to be a collapse of currencies and a movement towards commodities. And Babylon will become the world commercial center in the earth at the end times. And international banks and corporations will set up there. Next slide. But God will not allow Babylon to rule for the following reasons. And she will be destroyed, and its coalition will be destroyed because of, first, Babylon's iniquity. She has many magicians, soothsayers, and astrologers at the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. And I mentioned that in my last presentation about Israel and Europe. I talked a little bit about that, and that this occult was, of course, against who? God. And God will not allow it to remain. Secondly, Babylon's influence. She will be destroyed because of her influence. Because of this occult, wealth, and immorality, she will try to influence all other countries' social, political, and economic life through various means of communication. By newspaper, TV, and the internet. Thirdly, Babylon's infidelity. And this is why she will be destroyed. John in Revelation 18:5 reads, "For in her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquity." So like God, who destroyed the Tower of Babylon, so God will destroy this replica in the end times of the infidelity of the beast. And fourth is Babylon will be destroyed because of her inhumanity. People will be treated as commodities, not as created in the image and likeness of God. Babylon will be the center of sex trafficking, where untold thousands will be forced into prostitution. And in this tribulation period, those who do not accept the mark of the beast will be executed. Next slide. So Babylon's destruction. And this is described in Revelation 18. And it talks about this. Then a mighty angel took up a stone, like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, "Thus with violence and great city Babylon shall be thrown down, and shall not be found any more. The sounds of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard any more. Nor craftsmen or any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not be shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations will be deceived." End quote. So we see that Babylon will be a humble of activity and a business life. But the destruction of Babylon will happen within 1 hour. It talks about it in the Bible. And that Babylon in the end times, which is the center of the economic and social life, is gone. The world's economic system will collapse. So how will we as Christians respond to this worldwide collapse? Well, John talks about it to us in Revelation 18, verse 4, and it says, what must we do? We must what? Get out of Babylon. It talks about it because there's going to be the great destruction there. So get out of Babylon. Lest you share in her sins, unless you receive her plagues. In other words, those that will be there will receive that. And Paul also mentions in Romans 8 that how we must reject Babylon and share in God's promise. And that Paul says, "For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, nor things that are present or things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus." In other words, there's going to be the separation of the Christians and those who are basically the believers, the non-believers. Those that stay in Babylon will be destroyed. Those Christians, if you're a Christian but you stay in Babylon, you will be destroyed as well. If you get out of Babylon and you're a Christian, you will be saved. So in following Christ, those who remain will celebrate the triumph of good over evil, and these people shall see the final takedown of evil from all humankind. Now, in conclusion, we see, in looking at Russia and Babylon in the apocalypse, we notice how God will bring justice to the world, that both Russia and Babylon will be destroyed after they have tried to bring the downfall first to Israel, but secondly to the rest of the world. And in the end times, the apocalypse, the world will see that despite Israel's being so outmatched in winning the war, due to the circumstances, Russia, Babylon, and the rest of the world will see first how God is inevitably in charge and that God will bring about their destruction. And secondly, that all the people of the world will see that, yes, God is faithful to his word and in his mission. He is faithful to his covenant, first to his people Israel, but also to the Christian people as well. And that's the end of the presentation. My next presentation will be lesson 3. We talked first about Israel, or we talked about Israel and Europe. Today we talked about Russia and Babylon. And the final presentation will be on lesson 3, America, persecution, and we will talk about the Great Tribulation. Any thoughts or questions? And maybe what I'll do is I'll mention to you the books that I used. The books that I used were the Book of Signs. It's a very good book. And also The End Times Prophecy is also extremely very good book. And this is where most of my talk and that comes from, the two of these books. Thank you for coming. Any questions?